And the first thing I thought was, I'm going to Paris. I'm going to go eat. I've never had a 3-star meal. I'm going to go eat in all those 3-star restaurants. So the meals that I write about in the book are the meals that I ate when I went on, this first eating odyssey in France.
Yeah. Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Ruth Reichl, and we are going to be talking about her novel, The Paris Novel. There we go, which is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. Our Book Reporter reviewer, Jane Krebs, had this to say about it. Paris Novel includes exquisite details and pages of descriptions that open Paris for me, and I think that can happen for you too. And as I say in my Bets On copy, I do love armchair travel, especially when it's delivered to me by someone who clearly has fabulous taste, a keen eye, and a seasoned palate. And with that, welcome, Ruth. So great to have you here.
It's lovely to be here.
So let's start at the beginning, because this book is dedicated to the brilliant Susan Kamil, who had the idea for this book. And what had you written that inspired her to say, I want you to write the Paris book, the Paris novel?
So in my last book, Save Me the Plums, there's a chapter of a real event that occurred in my life where I walked into probably the best vintage clothing store in the world, a wonderful place in Paris. And I'd been going there since I was a teenager, but I had never dared touch anything because it's all really haute couture. It's museum quality clothing. And I had always gone in there and just looked. And now here I am. I'm the editor-in-chief of Gourmet Magazine. We're in Paris to do the Paris issue. And the little proprietress comes up and says to me, I have your dress. And she hands me this confection of lace and black chiffon. And I put it on and I am transformed. I do not recognize myself in the mirror. I have become this glamorous, sexy, I look like an aria is going to come out of my mouth. And I say, how much is it? And she says, oh, I'm going to go talk to the owner and make sure. She has this garbled conversation in French, and she comes back and says ecstatically, he's taken 20,000 francs off the price. It's only 50,000 francs. And I do the math and it's $6,000 and I don't buy the dress. And when Susan said, I love this chapter so much. Mm-hmm. Couldn't you imagine a novel where the character buys the dress? And the minute she said it, I saw the book. It was like, yes, I can do that.
There's the light. There's the light.
And I knew that I could put everything I care most about. I could put, food and fashion and literature and art, and Paris.
Right.
And so I started writing it, and tragically, a few months later, Susan passed away very unexpectedly and very quickly. And so I had an experience with writing this book that I've never had before. I mean, I am a writer who loathes writing. I like having written, but I will do anything to avoid the empty page. And this book was really different. I mean, I really felt like Susan was sitting on my shoulder as I was writing. And every day I would say to my family, I'm going to Paris now. And it was like I went to Paris and I just waited every day to see what these characters were going to do. And I had more fun writing this book than I have ever had writing anything or pretty much doing anything.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a lovely feeling. She was such a special person. I remember hearing you speak at her memorial, and then later reading you write, unlike so many editors, she genuinely did not want to be a writer herself. And so while she engaged with her authors in the fiercest way, she never put words in your mouth or on your pages, but she did read your mind. And I loved that. So how many books did you work on together?
Well, the first book we worked on was Delicious, my first novel. And then My Kitchen Year, Save Me the Plums, and this book. So this was the fourth.
The
But
fourth
this
book.
one I really felt was very much for her.
Mhm.
And I felt, you know, when I turned it in to Random House, there was this outpouring of, oh, Susan would be so happy.
Oh,
She
that's
would
lovely.
love this book.
Oh,
Yeah.
that just makes your day. That just makes your day. It's like so perfect. So what made you set it in Paris in 1983? Why that year?
There are a couple of reasons. First, I think it's very hard for young people who have always traveled with iPhones,
Mhm.
to know what traveling used to be like.
Mhm.
In the 80s, when you went to Paris or when you went anywhere, you went away. You didn't carry your life with you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was a very different experience. So I wanted my character to have that, to be disconnected from her life in a way which nobody is today.
Mhm.
The other reason was I went to Paris a lot my whole life, but always on no money.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, you know, in like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 80s, you could go there if you were poor, you could go there on $2 a day. You know, you'd eat, you know, bread and cheese in the park. And even though I was a restaurant critic starting in the mid 70s, I was freelance. I never had an expense account.
Right.
In 1984, I went to the LA Times. It was the first real job I ever had, a job with an expense account.
Mhm.
And when I said to my new boss, how much is my expense account? He said, we'll let you know when you go over it.
Oh, heaven, 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 heaven.
And the first thing I thought was, I'm going to Paris. I'm going to go eat. I've never had a 3-star meal. I'm going to go eat in all those 3-star restaurants.
Mhm.
So the meals that I write about in the book are the meals that I ate when I went on, you know, this first eating odyssey in France.
Yeah.
And so I wanted my character to have the experience of going from, you know, eating bread and cheese to, you know, discovering food. And I had the great pleasure of, I mean, when I went, I mean, I was a sophisticated eater. I mean, I hadn't eaten in, you know, 3 Michelin star restaurants in France, but I'd been eating in all the best restaurants in the United States.
Mhm.
And for me to imagine what it was like for someone who was in her 30s, but had never experienced the pleasure of food,
Mhm.
to eat those meals, I mean, to reimagine, I had all the notes from my own meals, but to reimagine it from the position of someone who's really never had the joy of food before,
Yeah.
was really fun.
Yeah, it's really, really great because Stella's got this hard start to her life. I mean, there's a hard open. Remember, the women in my book club were saying, oh, you know, trigger warning on, you know, chapter 2, you know, of what's going on. She's emotionally abandoned by her mother. She doesn't know who her father is. And as a result, she sheltered herself for self-preservation. Like, she's really had to try to take care of herself. But what drew you to want to be a character that was that troubled and reserved? Like, there was this girl who really was walking around with a lot on her back as she goes through every day of her life.
I, you know, I really I wanted Paris to open her up, and I really did want to start from a place of, you know, she's lived such a little life.
Mhm.
And part of it is that I wanted her to um to just have Paris be magic for her,
Mhm.
and in
Mhm.
this way, in a way that it can be. But I also wanted her to tell people, I mean, I think more people than we know have these terrible traumas.
Mhm.
I think there are an awful lot of women who've been sexually abused
Mhm.
as children that don't talk about it.
Mhm.
I mean, I have to say that this experience that I write about, it was my experience.
Wow.
I
Wow.
experienced myself.
Wow.
And I wanted her to represent the fact that you can get over it, that
Mhm.
no matter how traumatic, think, how traumatized you've been in your life, you can get beyond it.
And move from there.
And move from there. And so I really, I mean, I think it's something I've wanted to say my whole life. I've never really wanted to write about it, that in the first person, to talk about it even in the first person. I don't think I've ever told anyone before that it really was my experience, but it was.
Yeah.
And you know, there was a lot of discussion at Random House about whether I should take that out, and I was insistent that it needed to be there.
And it needs to be there because it infuses a lot of what her character is. Her character's guarded as a result. She's got walls up around her as a result. Her mother says go. She doesn't say go. She waits for her boss basically to say go. She's waiting for somebody else to pave the way for her to go.
Yeah, no, I mean, her boss essentially shoves her out the door and says, I don't want to see you, go away.
Yeah.
And I think I feel like it's an important message to say. This is not the end of your life, and she has sort of made it the end of pleasure for her. It's like, and I wanted that kind of, you know, I wanted her to be able to. I mean, she has had no friends. I mean, it's not just that she's lived this tiny life where she does the same thing and she doesn't allow herself any pleasures, and, you know, she doesn't like food. I mean, it's so limited, and I wanted her to learn to trust people, and and to have people see her for the first time in her life.
And it's really what comes true, because she doesn't trust anybody when she gets there. She's like looking over her shoulder, like, why are you really taking me to dinner? What's really going on here? And she's got to learn to trust. She's got to learn that if you're going to have a great experience, you got to let people help you. And that's the way it's going to be.
She has these extraordinary people. And, you know, I so fell in love with the character of Jules, this wonderful old man who genuinely sees her for she's never been seen like that before, and it's very hard for her to trust. So she has like that first night, that moment where she's just, oh my God, you know, he's the devil. I gotta get out of here.
I've got to get away from him. But before that, she just goes to this boutique and she walks in, and it's a vintage shop. And the shopkeeper does exactly what happened to you. She walks over and she goes, oh, I have this dress for you. And I had just watched the New Look on Apple TV.
I love that so much.
So great, so great. So I'm watching, and Christian Dior had named his dresses. So when I got to that part, I was like, you know, squealing, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly, I know what we're talking about with these dresses and the care. I mean, fashion today, I feel like there's no fashion today. I mean, it's totally scary. There are no models. Everybody's a celebrity. It's like ridiculous. But before, you had clothes that were crafted and they were beautiful, but you could picture other people wearing them. They were just fabulous by others. And she puts this on and boom, she feels special.
Yes. And, you know, and I think it's the first impulsive thing she's ever done in her life, but it's like she sees that woman in the mirror. And I did have that experience of seeing this woman in the mirror who is who you could be. And she says yes to it.
Says yes to the dress.
Out of character for her to say yes, but she does.
I think it's like a Cinderella moment. It's like the Cinderella moment where she goes in and all of a sudden she's very glamorous. And from there, people start to take her under her wing to expand her horizons, which is something she kind of pushes away at the beginning and then falls into. There's art, there's brilliant cuisine. And I loved hearing that you really did eat at all the restaurants and had all the foods that she was, because it was great.
Every meal
we've been counting on. So the descriptions of the meals and the food and the wine pairing is inspiring. Were those your favorite parts to write, or was it her? Like what, or was it all of it?
It was pretty much all of it, but I think my favorite parts were just the people. You know, I mean, you know, Jules and Django and George Whitman. I mean, I couldn't believe that nobody ever made a character out of George Whitman. I mean, I mean, when you start researching who this amazing man who started Shakespeare and Company, you know, most eccentric, wonderful guy.
I
Uh,
loved reading about that because I've heard the story, but I've never heard of the background. And you have George Whitman after the war, what he does. This other woman had owned the store, but she'd had all the books burned during the war. And now he's going to start this iconic place and go find these used books for people and cram the shelves full.
and actually, believe that literature is so important to people that there's a sign in his shop that says, take what you need, pay what you can.
Mm-hmm.
And he let people do that. And then the idea, I mean, I was never a tumbleweed, but I always I'm sorry I never did it. I knew lots of people who did, but he let people sleep in his shop. These people, writers, these with no money would come through and they didn't have a place to stay. And he'd say, well, pull up a chair, sleep in the shop.
She says, wait a second, I'm not a tumbleweed, because she's still trying to figure out who she is. But she does sleep in the shop. And then she goes up, like, where are you going to shower? Like, what are you going to do? And she realized everybody just decides they're going to get by. They'll figure it out. And it's very much this, well, what do you need? I'll help you do it. And it's just not something she was ever used to.
And they also, I mean, I especially love the idea of these tumbleweeds becoming a family. I mean, that she who has never allowed herself to have friends is suddenly, she's like sleeping on a ledge in the bookshop,
Yeah.
and getting to know these people who she would never have known, and they encourage her and they like her, and I mean, it a little of it comes from in when I was a restaurant critic of the New York Times, I wore these disguises. And one of the things that I realized was that you don't mean to, but you become the person you're pretending to be. You can't help it because people are responding to you as if you are that person.
Right.
And so, in this dress, she becomes someone else. And then she discovers that the more she pretends to be a tumbleweed, a person who could actually live in a bookshop,
Right.
she becomes that person.
And she becomes more curious. She comes like, well, wait, where is that piece of art? And why can't we find anything about that artist anymore? And where are the questions? And where are the answers to the questions? And it just becomes this ongoing thing. I love the line where you say you need to lose part of yourself to become part of a community. And she's at the part where she's always looking to be unhappy. And when fortune smiles, you immediately start to worry about how it will end instead of enjoying it. And I feel like you're a person that embraces fortune. Like when you sit there and say it, I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to be in the moment, I'm going to do it. But so many people sit there and say, but when this goes away, what happens? Like I'm staying at this great hotel, but I go home to my house instead of just enjoying the hotel.
Right. Well, and that to me is the secret of life, is to just enjoy what you've got, because you never know what's coming down the road. So I feel like nobody ever, on their deathbed said, oh, I had too much fun.
No, never. No, it's like, what are we going to do this afternoon? I had somebody who was out gardening at my house because I keep getting poison ivy. So I was like, okay, I think I need somebody to plant. I did like 7 hours on Saturday and I was like, Sunday, and I was like, okay. And she had her daughter here, which is this adorable little girl. And she just was experiencing, I was just watching her. She brings me a snail and she goes, can I keep this? And just that moment of enjoying everything and taking that moment and kind of embracing it. And it's like kind of like where you go when you're a child and you just look at things with wonder. And she's finally getting to look with wonder, is what I felt.
Yes, well, and that is what, everything's new. And here she is, she's an adult. She's an educated, very bright adult, but for her, the whole world is new. I mean, how much fun was that for me to write about, right? She's just like, she's looking at the fountains in Paris, and they're like, she's really looking at them because it's so new to her.
Right. And she also doesn't have she has a timeline on going back. That timeline can be extended. So it's not like I've got to cram this into today because I'm leaving by Friday. She doesn't really have that. She's got like this time kind of open to feel, and then where she goes from there.
Well, it's interesting because when you say that about the timeline, I mean, I sometimes feel like, I mean, having, been a person of the 60s, life was simpler. We didn't have the kind of timeline that kids today don't have. This stretch, before you have children, you have this kind of period of freedom in your life. And we really had that. I mean, I lived in a commune in Berkeley for 10 years. And you can't do that anymore today. And so there was a little bit of that bit, for me too, of writing this book, that, life without a timeline.
Yeah, life at that time, life where you're just going to have fun. So you also wove a mystery into the story as Stella starts to get more about the people who knew her mother. And she realizes her mother was not as spectacular as her mother thought she was. Like when they said her mother's food and they go, oh, she makes that, it's got like too many sauces on it. That's just not good food. Was the idea originally there for the mystery of her trying to discover more about her life, or did that come as you were writing? Like, who's my dad? Who's this?
It pretty much came as I was writing, and I felt really good. A psychiatrist said to me that one of the things that she liked very much about the book was that Stella begins to forgive her mother as she gets to know herself. And she said, and that is, what happens as you begin to know yourself better. You begin to sort of appreciate that your parents are different than you thought they were when you were younger.
Yeah, and she's sitting there and people are telling her things, and she's like, well, my mother made her sound like she was so bon vivant, and my mother made herself think like she was the, the pinnacle of excellence in all things. And now she's seeing, wait, there's a whole other side of being special and wonderful. And there's a more authentic way to be it than the way my mother put it on. And that's what I felt she was seeing, as people were authentically happy about food. They were happy about art. They were happy about everything, instead of always trying to pretend that it was a part of their lives.
Yes. And she starts to feel sorry for her mother because her mother was acting all the time.
And we know people like that. We know people like that, that you just watch and you go, how do you get through life doing that? Getting up every morning and doing that,
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And you're right, though. It's also, though, right now you have the phone with you, you have a map. Okay. The phone is telling you which way to walk, and you're never going to stumble on something because you made a mistake, because they're telling you exactly which way to go. So you don't have that serendipitous moment of just turning a corner and saying, look at this, because you're going for the goal. You're not going for the journey.
Yeah. And for me, traveling is about getting lost. And, it's so sad if you can't get lost.
Right. Right. Remember one time we were someplace in the Caribbean and we said we were going to walk. I think we were on Virgin Gorda. We were going to walk to the baths, and everybody at the hotel said, you're going to walk over there. And I said, yeah, I'd like to see. And I'll never forget, there were children getting out of school, playing jump rope and all these things. And that night when we came to dinner, they said, oh, good, we're glad you made it back. And I'm like, it's not like this wasn't even a bad area. I mean, what are you saying? No one had gone like unchauffeured to that part of the island. And I was like, okay, that's nice to know. But you want to get out and experience the place and see who the people are. I always used to talk to the drivers. I used to ask them about their lives. I used to ask them about everything, because those are the people that live there, as opposed to the people in the hotel here just being nice to you for money.
Yeah.
So second novel, fifth memoir, is one form easier than the other? Is a novel easier than the memoir? This one I know was.
It's just different. I mean, the thing about memoir is you're always worrying about the people in it. Who's going to be offended by this? What is my story to tell? What can I say? What can I say? When you're making things up, you have no problem.
No problem. No errors. My book group read it last night. I thought I should have served oysters or something brilliant. I served, like, you don't even want to know. I was like, geez, it was like not great. And I just thought the book discussion deserves food. So everybody who's watching this, if you go do this with your book club, great food. You've got to think about a menu, have people bring things, because I think the beauty of the book is embracing being there. Like, you put us there, but be there at the same time. So
yes.
To the book itself. So you have these chapter titles on each chapter. Did you write those as you were going, or did you go back and name them?
Yeah, I pretty much wrote them as I was going.
Oh, I love it. I love it because you're just sitting there and you get these little subtle hints of what's going to be in the chapter. Like, I'm just going to go just one, like, out of the whim. I'm just going to click a new way of seeing. Okay, where's that going to mean? Where's that going to take you? And I encourage people, breadcrumbs. I mean, there's just this little thing called breadcrumbs. What is that going to mean? And I just love the way you pull the whole story together that way, because you're saying something with every chapter title. And there's a little hint, but there's also that editor cover line kind of a thing, that word that's just going to come off the page that's going to get you to keep reading. Am I right?
Oh yeah, cover lines. I have to say I named the chapters after I had written the chapter, but I did it as I was going along, you know. So like a new way of seeing. I mean, I remember when I wrote the line and thought, that's the chapter title.
That's the chapter title. And I just thought, as I was going through, I thought cover lines. So, okay, let's get you through the next, let's entice you to pull it, like, it's not from the newsstand this time, it's to keep reading. It's to not stop. You're going to do that extra hour. Was this always the title?
It was, and I tell you that it was very controversial. I mean, they really wanted, all of my other titles are kind of, Garlic and Sapphires, Save Me the Plums. They're poetic, or they're from poetry. And this one, we went through a lot of titles, and I kept saying, we've called it the Paris novel the whole time.
Right.
Let's just call it the Paris novel. And it didn't really work. It felt like a placeholder until we got the right jacket.
I was going to say, because the jacket really does it as well. Yeah, we see fashion, food. We just see everything like right there. It's so special. Really, really special. So Kiri Sandy narrates the audio of the book. Have you had a chance to listen to it yet?
I have not listened to it. They sent me samples of 5 people reading. And I chose her from the 5. Is it good?
Yeah, I started listening. I was listening to just a little clip, and it's, she's just got this joy of life, like at the, and you're going to hear her voice change as time goes on. She's like that hesitant girl. And then where does she go from there? Which has got to be what it is.
Oh, great. I am going to listen to it, but I chose her for one, I really liked her voice and I liked her inflection, but also she speaks perfect French. And that felt really important to me. That, I mean, I have read all my memoirs for the audiobooks, but I'm not an actor, so I can't do the voices for the novels. And so when I asked them to send me samples, I said, I really want to hear the 2 men's voices.
Right.
I want to hear Jules and I want to hear Django.
Yes. Yeah. Because if those voices aren't right, it's not going to play well into the storyline at all. It's going to be abrupt. When it doesn't work, it's like this abrupt stop of who are you, listening to? Who are you saying?
Right, exactly.
I listened to Long Island this weekend when I was gardening. It was really funny how they did all these different voices, and I thought it was all different people. I honestly did not think it was the same person, and I was completely blown away. And later on, they did an interview with her, and I was like, that was the only person? Because there's so many characters. I said, how did you do that? Amazing. Amazing. So
that is art.
It is an art. It is an art. And also I speak no French. I mean, I can slaughter Spanish for that reason. I mean, I did 7 years of Spanish. You would never know. I can barely speak to a cleaning lady. If she speaks to me in Spanish, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. But I was reading French and I was like, there is no way I could read any of these words aloud because I will butcher them. Absolutely butcher them. But you inspired me because I don't cook a lot of French food, but you inspired me to grab a cookbook and go try and do something.
Yeah, well, I hope you got Richard Olney's book.
Okay, that's what I'm getting.
I mean, I make him a character in the book because he's one of those people who's a wonderful in real life, was a wonderful character. And he's also, for many of us, a favorite cookbook author and not well enough known.
Oh, okay. There's my list. It's going right on my list. I will be shopping. And it's when you walk away and you have that kind of a feeling like I'd like to try something different. We were in the store this week and I said to my husband, let's see if they have any oysters. And he's just looking at me like, where is this coming from? And I said, next week we're going to go to the farmer's market because I think they bring them up from the beach and we can do this. And he's just, okay, we'll go to the farmer's market and get oysters. And I think after almost 40 years or more than that with me, he's just like, where does this stuff come from? It comes out out of nowhere, it comes out of the book is the idea. So what's next? What's next for you?
Well, I still owe Random House another novel, and I am writing a sequel.
Oh, I love it. I
was so sorry to give these characters up that I just thought, I don't have to give them up.
No.
I can find out what happens next.
Yeah, I left them in a good place. Let's see where they go from there. I've got them someplace great. So are you going to pick up exactly an 80, like for
No,
where
no,
they
no.
were?
No, we're gonna be a leap.
A big leap? How far a leap? Do you know?
Go into the 90s.
Which were an amazing time. That was
Which was amazing time.
It was an amazing time, especially in New York. And when you think about, I always say that Vanity Fair, like Tina Brown gets a lot of credit for Vanity Fair being great. She kind of like couldn't screw up in the 90s because there was so much material there. And it was big and it was fabulous. And I just feel it was good years to write about,
Very good years to write about. Yeah.
Good fashion, good food, and really interesting people.
Yep. Good art. Yeah. Very interesting time. So I'm looking forward to it.
And it was also a time where it wasn't new money in a lot of ways. There was new money, but there's also a lot of old money and how that was being spent and what was going on. I always say you couldn't screw up in the 90s writing about people.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I want to see what happens to everybody next. I truly, truly do. And I thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Very much pleasure for me too. So,
and to everybody else, we look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To.